In the frozen wilderness of Alaska, where temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees and wolves hunt in packs, survival isn't just about staying warm. It's about making split-second decisions that determine who lives and who dies. Sarah Mitchell thought she was prepared for anything when she joined the elite search and rescue team. She had military training, years of wilderness experience, and enough confidence to take on the harshest conditions nature could throw at her. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment when 6 Navy SEALs would depend on her weapon to survive, and she would have to choose between following orders and following her instincts. This is the true story of how one woman's refusal to hand over her rifle saved 7 lives, exposed a deadly conspiracy, and changed military protocol forever. It's a story of betrayal at the highest levels, where the enemy wasn't just the brutal Alaskan wilderness, but the very people who were supposed to have their backs. When the radio went silent and the extraction never came, Sarah realized that sometimes the most dangerous predators walk on 2 legs and wear the same uniform you do. What started as a routine rescue mission in the remote Chugach Mountains quickly became a fight for survival against impossible odds. With supplies running low, temperatures dropping, and hostile forces closing in, Sarah would discover that her specialized sniper rifle wasn't just a tool. It was the thin line between life and death for everyone counting on her. But when her commanding officer demanded she surrender her weapon, she faced an impossible choice that would either save her team or destroy them all. Sarah Mitchell's breath formed small clouds in the minus 30-degree air as she adjusted the scope on her custom rifle. The weapon had been her companion for 3 years, modified specifically for long-range precision in extreme weather conditions. Every scratch on its surface told a story of successful missions, and today she hoped to add another victory to its record. The helicopter's rotors slowed to a stop as the team prepared to disembark at base camp. Sarah was the only woman among the 8-person search and rescue unit, but her teammates had long since stopped seeing her gender. They saw her skill, her unwavering calm under pressure, and most importantly, her ability to put a bullet exactly where it needed to go from distances that would challenge even veteran snipers. "Weather's getting worse," announced Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, the mission commander. His voice carried the authority of 20 years in special operations, but Sarah detected something else beneath the surface, a tension that seemed out of place for what should have been a routine extraction mission. The briefing had been simple enough. 6 Navy SEALs had gone missing during a classified operation in the Chugach Mountains. Their last known position was approximately 15 miles northeast of their current location, near an abandoned mining facility that had been closed for decades. The SEALs' emergency beacon had activated 3 days ago, but harsh weather conditions had prevented any rescue attempts until now. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her rifle case contained not just her primary weapon, but also specialized ammunition designed for extreme cold weather conditions. The bullets were custom-made, each one capable of maintaining accuracy even when fired in sub-zero temperatures that would cause standard ammunition to lose velocity and precision. "Mitchell, you're on point with the advance team," Harrison ordered. "We need your eyes on those mountains before we commit the full squad." Sarah nodded, shouldering her pack. At 32 years old, she had been part of more rescue missions than most soldiers saw in an entire career. Her background in military intelligence and specialized sniper training made her invaluable for operations in hostile territory. But something about this mission felt different from the beginning. The first sign of trouble came when they reached the halfway point to the SEALs' last known position. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, the team's communications specialist, reported that their radio contact with headquarters had become spotty. The mountains had a reputation for interfering with communications, but Torres looked concerned as he adjusted his equipment. "It's not just the terrain," he told Sarah quietly while the rest of the team took a brief rest. "The interference patterns are wrong. This looks more like active jamming than natural signal disruption." Sarah filed away this information while studying the landscape through her rifle's scope. The abandoned mining facility was visible in the distance, a collection of weathered buildings and rusted equipment that had been left to decay in the harsh Alaskan climate. Through her scope she could see movement around the buildings, but something about the pattern seemed off. "Harrison, I've got visual on the facility," she reported through her headset. "I'm seeing movement, but I can't confirm if it's our missing SEALs or something else." Harrison moved up beside her, using his own binoculars to scan the area. After several minutes of observation, he lowered his equipment with a frown. "We need to get closer. The weather's going to get worse before it gets better, and if those SEALs are injured, every minute counts." As they moved through the increasingly treacherous terrain, Sarah began to notice details that troubled her. The tracks in the snow around the facility weren't random. They showed clear patterns of organized movement, The kind of disciplined positioning that suggested military training. But if the SEALs were mobile enough to establish defensive positions, why hadn't they been able to make contact with headquarters? The team established a forward observation post about half a mile from the mining facility, using the natural cover of large boulders and sparse vegetation. From this position, Sarah could use her rifle's scope to conduct detailed surveillance of the target area. What she saw through the lens made her blood run cold. The 6 Navy SEALs were indeed at the facility, but they weren't alone. At least 12 other figures moved among the buildings, all armed and clearly coordinating their movements with military precision. Worse still, the SEALs appeared to be restrained, their hands bound behind their backs as they were moved from one building to another under guard. "This isn't a rescue mission anymore," Sarah whispered into her microphone. "Our SEALs are being held prisoner by what looks like a well-organized hostile force." Harrison's response surprised her. Instead of immediately calling for backup or requesting orders from headquarters, he seemed more interested in the specific details of what she was observing. "How many hostiles can you confirm? What kind of equipment are they carrying?" Sarah adjusted her scope, taking careful note of every detail she could observe. "I count at least 12, possibly more, inside the buildings. They're carrying military-grade assault rifles, wearing tactical gear that looks professionally maintained. This isn't some random group of criminals. These people have training and resources." What happened next would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. Harrison quietly moved to each member of their team, speaking in hushed tones that she couldn't quite hear. One by one, she noticed her teammates' expressions change, their body language becoming more tense and alert. But their alert attention wasn't focused on the mining facility where the SEALs were being held. It was focused on her. Torres approached her position with an expression she had never seen on his face before. "Sarah, the lieutenant colonel needs to speak with you privately." Something in his tone made her instinctively grip her rifle more tightly. 3 years of dangerous missions had taught her to trust her instincts. And right now, every instinct was screaming that something was terribly wrong. Harrison approached with 2 other team members flanking him, their weapons held in what appeared to be a casual manner, but which Sarah recognized as a tactical formation designed to control her movement options. "Mitchell, I need you to hand over your weapon," Harrison said, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "There's been a change in the mission parameters." Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she processed the implications. In all her years of service, no commanding officer had ever asked her to surrender her weapon during an active mission, unless she was being arrested or there was immediate danger of friendly fire. Neither situation applied here. "Sir, with respect, I'd like to understand the reason for this order," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "We have 6 SEALs in immediate danger, and my weapon might be the difference between a successful rescue and a catastrophe." Harrison's expression hardened. "This is not a request, Mitchell. Hand over the rifle immediately. That's a direct order." As Sarah looked around at her teammates, she realized with growing horror that she was completely isolated. Torres wouldn't meet her eyes. The other team members had positioned themselves to block any escape routes, and Harrison's hand was now resting on his sidearm in a gesture that was far from accidental. In that moment, Sarah understood that this had never been a rescue mission. The missing SEALs weren't the victims of an unfortunate accident or enemy action. They had been deliberately led into a trap. And now she was being asked to surrender the one tool that might be able to save them. The radio crackled to life with a transmission that chilled her to the bone. "Control to Harrison. What's the status on securing the asset?" Harrison keyed his microphone, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "Asset is secure, proceeding with Phase 2. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. She wasn't part of the rescue team. She was the asset they had come to secure. Her specialized rifle, her unique skills, her knowledge of the terrain and the facility's layout, everything about this mission had been designed to get her into position where she could be captured along with the SEALs. But whoever had planned this operation had made one critical error. They had assumed that Sarah would follow orders without question, that her military training would override her survival instincts. They didn't account for the fact that 3 years of life-or-death missions had taught her to think independently and react quickly when situations went wrong. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She was outnumbered 7-1, surrounded by people she had trusted with her life countless times before. Her rifle contained only 5 rounds in the chamber, and her sidearm held 15. Even if she could neutralize the immediate threat, she would still need to rescue 6 SEALs from a fortified position while being hunted by hostile forces in some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. The wind picked up, bringing with it the promise of the blizzard that weather reports had predicted. In a few hours, visibility would drop to near zero, and temperatures would plummet to levels that could kill an unprotected person in minutes. Whatever she was going to do, she needed to do it quickly. "I understand your position, Colonel," Sarah said, slowly beginning to unsling her rifle. "But before I hand over my weapon, I think you should know that I've been recording everything since we established this position." It was a bluff, but Harrison's momentary hesitation told her that he wasn't entirely certain whether or not she was telling the truth. That hesitation was all the opening she needed. Sarah dropped to one knee, bringing her rifle up in a fluid motion that years of training had made automatic. Her first shot took out Torres's radio equipment, ensuring that he couldn't call for backup. Her second shot shattered Harrison's weapon before he could draw it completely. The remaining 3 shots were placed with surgical precision, disabling equipment and creating chaos without causing fatal injuries. In the confusion that followed, Sarah rolled behind the boulder that had been providing cover for their observation post. She could hear Harrison shouting orders, but the wind was picking up and the first snowflakes of the approaching blizzard were beginning to fall. "You're making a huge mistake, Mitchell," Harrison called out. "You have no idea what you're dealing with here." Sarah quickly assessed her situation. She had her rifle, her sidearm, and enough ammunition for a short firefight. She also had her specialized equipment pack, which included survival gear rated for extreme weather conditions. Most importantly, she had detailed knowledge of the terrain and the location of the captured SEALs. What she didn't have was any way to call for legitimate backup, any guarantee that the people pursuing her wouldn't shoot to kill, or any certainty that the approaching blizzard wouldn't make rescue impossible even if she succeeded in reaching the SEALs. Through her rifle scope, she could see activity increasing around the mining facility. Whoever was holding the SEALs had apparently been alerted to the situation and was preparing for some kind of action. Sarah realized that she had perhaps 30 minutes before the blizzard hit in full force, making movement nearly impossible. The decision was simple, even if the execution would be anything but easy. 6 Navy SEALs were counting on someone to get them out of their predicament, and she was the only person in position to help them. Harrison and his team might have superior numbers and support, but Sarah had something they didn't, a personal investment in making sure that the good guys survived. She began moving toward the mining facility, using the deteriorating weather conditions to mask her approach. Behind her, she could hear Harrison's team organizing a pursuit, but she had a significant head start and intimate knowledge of how to use the terrain to her advantage. As the snow began to fall more heavily, Sarah Mitchell disappeared into the Alaskan wilderness, carrying nothing but her specialized rifle and an unshakable determination to save 6 men who were counting on her to refuse the order that would have gotten them all killed. The blizzard hit with the fury of nature unleashed, transforming the Alaskan landscape into a white nightmare where visibility dropped to mere feet and the wind howled with enough force to knock a person off balance. Sarah pulled her specialized cold weather gear tighter around her body as she moved through the storm, using her intimate knowledge of mountain terrain to navigate toward the mining facility. Her rifle, wrapped in a protective covering designed for extreme weather operations, remained functional despite the harsh conditions. The specialized scope could cut through snow and poor visibility better than standard equipment, giving her a crucial advantage in the deteriorating conditions. Every step forward required careful consideration. One wrong move in this weather could mean falling into a hidden crevice or becoming disorientated enough to wander in circles until hypothermia claimed her. Through the storm, Sarah could make out the lights of the mining facility, artificial illumination that seemed to mock the natural chaos surrounding it. The fact that her enemies were maintaining such obvious visibility told her they were confident in their position. Either they believed the weather would prevent any rescue attempt, or they had enough resources to handle whatever threats might emerge from the storm. As she drew closer, Sarah established a concealed position behind an overturned mining truck that had been abandoned decades ago. The rusted vehicle provided both wind protection and visual cover while she assessed the situation through her rifle scope. What she observed made her realize just how complex and well-planned this operation truly was. The 12 hostiles she had identified earlier were still present, but they had been joined by additional personnel who appeared to be arriving by snowmobile despite the hazardous weather conditions. These weren't desperate criminals or random opportunists. They were operating with the kind of logistics support and coordination that suggested significant resources and professional planning. Through her scope, Sarah could see the 6 Navy SEALs being held in what appeared to be the facility's main administrative building. They were bound but appeared to be uninjured, which suggested their captors needed them alive for some specific purpose. The building had multiple entry and exit points, all of which were being monitored by armed guards who rotated positions with military precision. The sound of snowmobiles approaching from behind made Sarah's blood run cold. Harrison and his team had managed to follow her trail despite the storm, and they were closing in on her position with vehicles that would give them significant mobility advantages in the harsh conditions. She estimated she had perhaps 10 minutes before they would be close enough to engage her effectively. Sarah keyed her emergency radio, hoping that somehow she might be able to reach legitimate military authorities despite the jamming that Torres had detected. Static filled her earpiece, but underneath the interference she thought she could hear fragments of communications. Someone was monitoring emergency frequencies, but whether they were friend or foe remained unclear. Any station, this is Operative Mitchell with emergency traffic, she transmitted, knowing that her position would be compromised by the transmission, but hoping that someone legitimate might receive her message. 6 Navy SEALs being held captive at coordinates. She rattled off the facility's location, then added, hostile force estimated at 15+ individuals, professional equipment and coordination. Requesting immediate backup and extraction support. The response that came through the static made her question everything she thought she knew about the situation. Mitchell, this is General Patricia Hayes, Joint Task Force Alaska. Your transmission has been received. Be advised that Operation Silent Winter is a classified mission, and you are interfering with vital national security objectives. Stand down immediately and await extraction. Sarah stared at her radio in disbelief. General Hayes was one of the most respected officers in the military, a woman whose career had been built on uncompromising integrity and dedication to protecting American personnel. If Hayes was involved in this operation, it meant that what Sarah was witnessing wasn't rogue action by Harrison and his team. It was sanctioned at the highest levels of command. But something about the general's tone seemed wrong. Hayes had a reputation for caring deeply about the welfare of individual soldiers, especially those operating in dangerous conditions. The woman on the radio sounded like someone reading from a script rather than someone genuinely concerned about military personnel in harm's way. The sound of approaching snowmobiles grew louder, forcing Sarah to make a critical decision. She could surrender to Harrison's team and hope that whatever classified operation was taking place would eventually resolve in favor of the captured SEALs. Or she could continue with her unauthorized rescue attempt, knowing that she would be acting against direct orders from legitimate military authority. Through her rifle scope, she watched one of the captors strike one of the SEALs across the face for some perceived infraction. The bound Navy SEAL stumbled but maintained his dignity, refusing to show weakness even in captivity. In that moment, Sarah realized that following orders wasn't always the same thing as doing what was right. She began moving toward the facility's perimeter, using the storm as cover while staying ahead of Harrison's pursuit team. The mining facility had been built into the side of a mountain, with multiple levels connected by external stairs and walkways that were now treacherous with ice and snow. Sarah's plan was simple but dangerous. She would use her superior marksmanship skills to systematically eliminate the guards from long range, then move in to extract the SEALs before anyone could organize an effective response. The first shot was the most important. Sarah positioned herself approximately 400 yards from the facility, far enough away to avoid immediate detection but close enough to ensure accuracy despite the weather conditions. Through her scope, she tracked the movement patterns of the guards, looking for the moment when she could eliminate multiple targets in rapid succession. Her specialized ammunition performed exactly as designed, maintaining accuracy despite the extreme cold and wind. The first guard dropped silently, his body falling behind a stack of mining equipment where it wouldn't be immediately visible to his colleagues. Sarah quickly shifted her aim and took down a second guard who was patrolling the facility's main entrance. 2 down, at least 13 to go. The third shot created complications. The guard she targeted was positioned near a window where one of his colleagues could see him fall. Within seconds, alarms were sounding throughout the facility and personnel were scrambling to defensive positions. Sarah's advantage of stealth was gone, but she had managed to eliminate 3 guards and create enough confusion to disrupt their organized defense. Moving quickly, Sarah abandoned her long-range position and began advancing toward the facility through the storm. Her rifle was now configured for close to medium-range engagements, and she carried additional magazines of ammunition that would allow her to sustain fire for several minutes if necessary. The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the facility's defenders tried to locate and eliminate the threat. Sarah could hear shouted commands in English, but also detected what sounded like communications in Russian, or another Eastern European language. Whatever this operation was about, it involved players beyond just American military personnel. Sarah reached the facility's perimeter fence and used wire cutters from her equipment pack to create an entry point. The storm was now so intense that visibility was limited to just a few yards, which worked both for and against her. She could move without being easily detected, but she also couldn't see threats until they were very close. Inside the facility compound, Sarah moved from building to building, systematically clearing each structure while working her way toward the administrative building where the SEALs were being held. The defenders had scattered throughout the complex, making it difficult for her to predict where threats might emerge. She eliminated 2 more hostiles in close-quarters engagements, but each encounter increased the risk that she might be overwhelmed by superior numbers. The administrative building presented the greatest challenge. It was a 3-story structure with multiple entrances and windows, all of which were being monitored by defenders who now knew exactly what they were facing. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from several positions, indicating that at least 4 or 5 hostiles were inside the building with the captured SEALs. As she prepared to assault the building, Sarah heard a voice calling through the storm. "Mitchell! This is Harrison. You're surrounded and outgunned. Surrender now, and this can still end without anyone getting killed." Sarah keyed her radio, responding on a frequency she knew Harrison's team would be monitoring. "Harrison, I've got a better idea. Why don't you explain to me why 6 Navy SEALs are being held prisoner by people who speak Russian? And while you're at it, maybe you can tell me why General Hayes sounds like someone reading from a script when she orders me to abandon American military personnel." Harrison's response revealed more than he probably intended. "You don't understand the bigger picture here, Mitchell. These SEALs stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. The people holding them have information that could prevent a much larger conflict. Sometimes you have to make hard choices to serve the greater good." The admission confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The SEALs hadn't been captured by enemy forces during a routine operation. They had discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep secret, and now they were being silenced to protect whatever conspiracy they had uncovered. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. She launched herself toward the administrative building, using covering fire to suppress the defenders while she closed the distance to the main entrance. Her rifle's specialized ammunition punched through the building's windows, forcing the hostiles to take cover and giving her the opportunity to breach the entrance. Inside the building, Sarah found herself in a maze of offices and corridors that had been modified for the current operation. Computer equipment and communication gear filled rooms that had once housed mining administrative functions. This wasn't a temporary operation. Someone had invested significant time and resources into establishing a permanent facility in this remote location. The sound of voices led Sarah toward the building's central conference room, where she could hear one of the captors interrogating the SEALs in accented English. Through a partially open door, she could see 3 of the captured Navy personnel bound to chairs, while a man in expensive cold weather gear demanded information about what you saw at the glacier site. Sarah positioned herself to get the best possible angle on the room, then made her move. Her first shot eliminated the interrogator before he could react. Her second shot severed the ropes binding the nearest SEAL, who immediately rolled toward cover and began freeing his colleagues. Within seconds, the balance of power in the room had shifted dramatically. "Who the hell are you?" asked the SEAL she had freed, a man whose name tape read, Davidson. "Someone who believes in bringing people home," Sarah replied while scanning for additional threats. "Can you and your people move in this weather?" Davidson nodded grimly. "We've been in worse conditions. But we need to move fast. These people have been expecting some kind of delivery tonight, and when it doesn't arrive on schedule, they're going to realize something's gone wrong." The delivery Davidson mentioned turned out to be the key to understanding the entire operation. Hidden in the facility's basement, Sarah and the SEALs discovered a cache of military equipment that included weapons, ammunition, and communication gear marked with Cyrillic characters. More disturbing still were documents that appeared to detail planned attacks on American military installations, written in what looked like Russian intelligence formats. "This is what we stumbled onto 3 days ago," explained another SEAL, whose name tape read Martinez. "We were conducting routine surveillance on what we thought was an abandoned facility when we discovered this cache. Before we could report our findings, we were ambushed by people who clearly knew we were coming. The implications were staggering. Someone within American military leadership was cooperating with hostile foreign agents, providing them with detailed information about military operations and personnel. The SEALs had been set up to discover the cache, then captured to prevent them from reporting what they had found. But the operation was even more complex than simple espionage. The documents Sarah found suggested that the planned attacks were designed to look like domestic terrorism, creating a pretext for expanded military operations and increased defense spending that would benefit specific contractors and officials. The captured SEALs weren't just witnesses to foreign infiltration. They were witnesses to a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American military and political leadership. The sound of helicopters approaching through the storm indicated that someone had decided to escalate the situation. Sarah looked out through the building's windows and could see aircraft lights approaching despite the hazardous weather conditions. Either legitimate rescue forces had finally arrived, or the conspirators were bringing in additional resources to eliminate all witnesses to their operation. Davidson grabbed Sarah's arm as they prepared to evacuate the building. Whatever happens next, you need to know that what you did here tonight saved more than just 6 SEALs. The information we discovered could prevent attacks that would have killed hundreds of American military personnel. Sarah nodded that her attention was focused on the approaching helicopters. Through her rifle scope, she could see that the aircraft were military models, but they weren't displaying standard identification markings. Worse still, she could see personnel preparing to rappel from the helicopters while carrying weapons and equipment that suggested they were coming to eliminate witnesses rather than conduct a rescue. The storm that had provided cover for Sarah's infiltration was now beginning to subside, meaning that whoever was in those helicopters would have clear visibility of the facility and everyone in it. Sarah realized that her successful rescue of the SEALs might have only prolonged their lives by a few minutes, unless she could find a way to get them out of the area before the helicopters could establish a perimeter. But as she prepared to lead the SEALs toward the facility's vehicle depot, Sarah noticed something that changed everything. One of the approaching helicopters was transmitting a signal that her specialized radio equipment recognized as a legitimate military emergency frequency. Someone was broadcasting authentication codes that indicated genuine rescue operations rather than hostile action. The question was whether Sarah could trust her equipment's readings, or whether even the authentication codes had been compromised by the conspiracy she had uncovered. With 6 Navy SEALs depending on her judgment and helicopters full of armed personnel minutes away from landing, Sarah faced a decision that would determine whether her defiance of orders would result in salvation or catastrophe for everyone she was trying to save. The moment of truth arrived as the first helicopter touched down in the facility's makeshift landing zone, its rotors whipping the settling snow into a white maelstrom. Sarah positioned herself at a window where she could observe the aircraft while keeping her rifle trained on the personnel beginning to emerge. Through her scope, she could see figures in standard military gear, but something about their movements and equipment still seemed wrong. Davidson and the 5 other rescued SEALs had taken defensive positions throughout the administrative building, using furniture and equipment to create makeshift barriers. Despite being captive for 3 days, they moved with the fluid precision of elite military units, their training taking over despite their physical exhaustion and the psychological trauma of captivity. I count at least 20 personnel from the first aircraft, Davidson reported through the radio they had taken from their former captors. Second helicopter is circling. Looks like they're establishing a perimeter before landing. Sarah's specialized radio equipment continued to receive what appeared to be legitimate military authentication codes, but she had learned not to trust anything at face value in this operation. The conspiracy she had uncovered was sophisticated enough to potentially compromise even the most secure communication protocols. Through her rifle scope, Sarah studied the faces of the personnel who had emerged from the first helicopter. Most were wearing cold weather masks that obscured their features, but she could see enough to determine that these weren't the same people who had been holding the SEALs captive. The body language was different. The equipment was standard military issue rather than the mixed foreign and domestic gear she had observed earlier, and their formation patterns matched legitimate rescue operation protocols. The radio crackled to life with a transmission that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "Mitchell, this is Colonel Rebecca Santos, Joint Special Operations Command. We've been tracking your situation through emergency frequencies and satellite surveillance. Authenticate with Sierra 7 Alpha 9 if you are in control of the facility." Sarah knew Colonel Santos by reputation. She was one of the most decorated female officers in special operations, with a record of successful missions that included several high-profile hostage rescues. More importantly, Santos had a reputation for refusing to abandon personnel in the field, even when ordered to do so by higher command authorities.
But Sarah had also learned that reputations could be manufactured, and even the most secure communication systems could be compromised.
She needed verification that went beyond radio transmissions and authentication codes. "Davidson," she called to the SEAL team leader. "Do you know Colonel Rebecca Santos from Joint Special Operations Command?" Davidson's face lit up with the first expression of genuine hope Sarah had seen since the rescue began. "Santos? Hell yes. She pulled my unit out of a nightmare situation in Syria 2 years ago. If Santos is here, we're going home." The confirmation from Davidson was encouraging, but Sarah had learned to verify everything independently. Through her rifle scope, she began studying the personnel from the helicopters more carefully, looking for specific details that would confirm their legitimacy. What she observed gradually convinced her that these might actually be legitimate rescue forces. The equipment was standard military issue, without the modifications and foreign markings she had seen on the conspiracy's gear. The personnel moved with discipline but without the paranoid hypervigilance of people conducting illegal operations. Most convincingly, she could see medical personnel and equipment being unloaded from the helicopters, suggesting that someone was genuinely concerned about the welfare of the rescued SEALs. Sarah keyed her radio, responding to Colonel Santos with information that would verify her own identity and situation. Colonel Santos, this is Mitchell. I have 6 Navy SEALs secured, facility cleared of hostiles, and evidence of compromised operations at command level. Requesting verification of your authorization and status of Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's team. Santos's response provided the final confirmation Sarah needed. Mitchell, Harrison's team has been detained by military police on charges of treason and conspiracy. General Hayes was found dead in her quarters 6 hours ago. Apparent suicide when she learned that her involvement in the conspiracy had been discovered. You are authorized to bring the SEALs to Extraction Point Alpha for immediate medical evaluation and debriefing. The news about General Hayes hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had suspected that the general's radio transmissions had been coerced or faked, but the reality that such a respected officer had been compromised by the conspiracy was deeply troubling. It meant that the corruption reached higher into military leadership than even her worst fears had suggested. But there was no time to process the emotional impact of these revelations. The sound of approaching vehicles indicated that additional threats might still be in the area, and Sarah needed to get the SEALs to safety before anyone else arrived who might want to silence witnesses to the conspiracy. Davidson, gather your people, Sarah ordered. We're moving to Extraction Point Alpha for pickup. As the SEALs prepared to evacuate the building, Sarah took one final look through her rifle scope at the evidence they were leaving behind. The cache of foreign weapons and the documents detailing planned attacks against American military installations represented proof of a conspiracy that could have resulted in the deaths of hundreds of military personnel. Her refusal to surrender her weapon had prevented that catastrophe, but she wondered how many other similar operations might be continuing undetected. The movement to the extraction point required crossing approximately 200 yards of open ground while carrying the evidence they had discovered and supporting Martinez, who had sustained a leg injury during their original capture. Sarah provided overwatch with her rifle while Santos's personnel established a security perimeter and prepared their helicopters for immediate departure. During the extraction process, Colonel Santos approached Sarah with an expression of professional respect mixed with curiosity. Mitchell, I've read your service record, and what you accomplished here tonight goes beyond anything in your training or previous experience. What made you decide to disobey direct orders from a lieutenant colonel and continue with an unauthorized rescue operation? Sarah considered the question while watching the SEALs being loaded into the medical helicopter. Ma'am, sometimes you have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. These men were counting on someone to refuse the order that would have gotten them killed. Quiet. Santos nodded slowly. The preliminary investigation suggests that this conspiracy involved at least a dozen high-ranking military officers and several defense contractors. The planned attacks would have justified massive increases in defense spending while eliminating military personnel who might have opposed the expansion. Your actions tonight didn't just save 6 SEALs. You prevented an attack on American democracy itself. As the helicopters lifted off from the mining facility, Sarah looked down at the complex that had been the site of so much deception and violence. The abandoned buildings looked innocent enough from the air, just another forgotten piece of Alaska's industrial history. But she knew that somewhere in those structures lay evidence of how close America had come to a devastating attack orchestrated by its own military leadership. The flight back to base provided Sarah with time to process everything that had happened. The specialized rifle that Harrison had demanded she surrender had indeed been the key to saving 7 lives. But more importantly, her refusal to follow orders had exposed a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of American military operations worldwide. Davidson, despite his exhaustion and injuries, made his way to Sarah's position in the helicopter. I need you to know something, he said, speaking loudly enough to be heard over the aircraft's engines. What we discovered at that facility was just one piece of a larger operation. The documents we found reference similar caches at locations throughout Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. Your actions tonight started something that's going to take months or years to fully investigate and resolve. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. Her decision to keep her weapon and attempt the unauthorized rescue had been just the beginning of what would likely be one of the largest military corruption investigations in American history. The evidence she and the SEALs had secured would lead to arrests, court-martial proceedings, and reforms that would change how military operations were planned and executed. But the personal cost of her actions was also becoming clear. Disobeying direct orders, even orders that proved to be compromised, would have consequences for her military career. She had saved lives and exposed a dangerous conspiracy, but she had also violated the chain of command in a way that would require extensive investigation and review. Colonel Santos seemed to read her thoughts. "Mitchell, you should know that the initial investigation indicates that your actions were not only justified but essential to preventing a national security catastrophe.
However, the military legal system will still need to review your decisions and determine appropriate recognition or consequences."
The helicopter touched down at a secure military facility, where Sarah and the SEALs were immediately separated for individual debriefing sessions that would continue for several days.
Sarah's rifle, the weapon that had been so central to the entire operation, was taken as evidence while investigators worked to reconstruct exactly what had happened at the mining facility. During her debriefing sessions, Sarah learned the full scope of the conspiracy that had been uncovered. The investigation had revealed connections between compromised military officers, defense contractors seeking increased government contracts, and foreign intelligence services looking to destabilize American military capabilities. The planned attacks would have created a crisis that justified massive increases in military spending while eliminating key personnel who might have opposed the expansion. Harrison and 6 other officers were eventually court-martialed and sentenced to life imprisonment for treason. The defense contractors involved in the conspiracy faced federal charges that would result in billions of dollars in fines and the dissolution of several major corporations. The foreign intelligence agents who had been operating in Alaska were either arrested or fled the country when their involvement was discovered. 6 months after the incident, Sarah found herself standing before a military review board that would determine the final consequences of her actions. The board included several general officers, military legal experts, and representatives from various intelligence agencies who had been investigating the conspiracy. The board's chairman, General Robert Mitchell, no relation despite the shared surname, read from a prepared statement that would define the rest of Sarah's military career. "Sergeant First Class Mitchell, your actions on the night in question violated direct orders from superior officers and standard military protocol. However, the investigation has determined that those orders were issued by personnel involved in treasonous activities, and that following those orders would have resulted in the deaths of American military personnel and a significant threat to national security." The general paused, looking directly at Sarah before continuing. "The board finds that your actions, while technically insubordinate, were necessary and appropriate given the circumstances you faced. You are hereby commended for exceptional bravery and decisive action in the face of unprecedented challenges. Your refusal to surrender your weapons saved American lives and exposed a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of our military institutions." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication, but the general wasn't finished. "However, your actions also highlighted significant weaknesses in our command structure and communication protocols that allowed this conspiracy to develop undetected. You are being transferred to a new position within military intelligence where your experience and judgment will be used to develop new protocols for detecting and preventing similar infiltrations." The new assignment would take Sarah away from the field operations she loved, but it would also give her the opportunity to help prevent future conspiracies from threatening American military personnel. The specialized rifle that had been so crucial to her success would be returned to her, modified with new equipment that would help her train other personnel in techniques for operating independently when normal command structures were compromised. Years later, Sarah would often think about the moment when Harrison had ordered her to surrender her weapon. In that instant, she had been forced to choose between military discipline and moral courage, between following orders and saving lives. The fact that she had chosen correctly had saved not just 6 Navy SEALs, but potentially hundreds of other American military personnel who would have been targets of the planned attacks. The investigation ultimately revealed that the conspiracy had been years in development, with tentacles reaching throughout the military hierarchy and defense industry. Sarah's refusal to hand over her rifle had been the single action that had prevented the plan from reaching fruition, proving that sometimes the most important battles are won by individuals who refuse to surrender when everyone around them demands compliance. Davidson and his 5 fellow SEALs all received medical treatment for their injuries and psychological counseling for their ordeal. Each of them was eventually returned to active duty, but they remained in contact with Sarah, bound together by the experience they had shared in the Alaskan wilderness. They had learned that sometimes survival depends not just on training and equipment, but on having someone who is willing to risk everything to do what's right. The abandoned mining facility was eventually demolished, its buildings and equipment destroyed to prevent any future use by hostile forces. But the lessons learned from the incident led to significant changes in military protocol, communication security, and oversight procedures designed to prevent similar conspiracies from developing undetected. Sarah's rifle, the weapon that had been central to exposing the entire conspiracy, was eventually displayed in a military museum with a plaque that read simply, "Sometimes the most important order a soldier can refuse is the one that would prevent them from saving lives." The inscription captured the essence of what had happened during those crucial hours in Alaska, when one woman's refusal to surrender her weapon had changed the course of American military history and saved countless lives in the process. "Want to survive? Hand me the gun." They seized her rifle and nearly got the SEALs killed.